The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was older than most civilizations. Its walls were made from metals that had been pulled from dying stars. Its floors had been walked upon by species that no longer existed, and on this particular day, it was filled with representatives from the 7 most powerful species in the known galaxy. All of them gathered to discuss one thing: the strange little creatures from the 3rd planet of an unremarkable yellow sun, humans. Ambassador Vexari stood at the center of the chamber, his crystalline body catching the light and throwing small rainbows across the ancient walls. He was tall, even by Tellurian standards, and his species had spent the last 19 years studying Earth from a safe distance. They had watched humanity through hidden probes, they had intercepted their radio signals, they had analyzed their art, their wars, their religions, and their strange habit of keeping small, furry animals in their homes for no practical purpose whatsoever. Now, Vexari was ready to share what they had learned. "Fellow delegates," he began, his voice resonating through the translation devices worn by every representative in the room, "I come before you today with a complete psychological profile of the species known as humans." The Vorthak delegate shifted in her specially designed chair. She was a massive creature, covered in thick armor plates that had evolved over millions of years on a high-gravity world. Her people feared very little. But even she was curious about these soft, pink creatures who had somehow split the atom and walked on their own moon despite having bodies that looked like they could be injured by a stiff breeze. "The humans," Vexari continued, "are perhaps the most death-obsessed species we have ever encountered. After Fester, I did the daughter." This got everyone's attention. Every aspect of their culture revolves around their fear of dying. They have created thousands of religions, almost all of which promise some form of existence after death. They build enormous hospitals dedicated to keeping their failing bodies alive for just a few more years. They write stories about immortality, about cheating death, about coming back from the grave. Vexari paused for effect. He was good at pauses. They even freeze their dead bodies in the hope that future generations will find a way to bring them back to life. The Navari delegate made a sound that the translator interpreted as disgust. Her species lived for nearly 1,000 years, and they found humanity's brief lifespan to be almost tragic. 80 years? Some Navari took longer than that to choose a career. "What does this mean for negotiations?" asked the Kethari representative, a floating cloud of gas and electricity, who communicated through carefully modulated static. "If they fear death so greatly, they should be easy to intimidate." Vexari's crystal body pulsed with approval. "Exactly. We believe that humanity will be eager to accept whatever terms we offer, as long as we make it clear that resistance would be dangerous for them." The council members murmured their agreement. It made perfect sense. Every species in the galaxy feared death to some degree. It was the one universal constant, the one thing that united all living creatures, and if humans feared it more than most, then they would be simple to control. The Galactic Council had made many assumptions about many species over the millennia. They had been wrong before, but they had never been quite this wrong. 3 days later, the human delegation arrived. Their ship was not impressive by galactic standards. It was a blocky, utilitarian thing, clearly designed by engineers who cared more about function than form. It landed in the council's docking bay with a heavy thud that made several delegates wince, and then sat there for a long moment, venting steam and making sounds that suggested its engines were held together by hope and stubbornness. The airlock opened, and the humans stepped out. There were 5 of them. They wore simple dark suits, except for one woman in the back who was carrying a large bag full of what appeared to be electronic tablets and paper documents. They walked with a casual confidence that seemed almost inappropriate for creatures who were meeting alien life for the first time. At the front of the group was a man in his 50s, with gray hair cut short, and a face that looked like it had been used to stop several punches over the years. His name was Danny Kowalski, and he had been selected as humanity's ambassador for reasons that the Galactic Council would soon come to understand. "Ambassador Kowalski," said Vexari, stepping forward to greet the humans. "On behalf of the Galactic Council, I welcome you." Kowalski looked up at the towering crystal alien, and his face broke into a wide grin. "Good to meet you," he said, sticking out his hand in the human greeting gesture. "Hell of a place you've got here." Vexari did not have hands in the traditional sense, but he extended a crystalline appendage and allowed the human to shake it. The man's grip was firm, perhaps too firm. Vexari made a mental note. "Allow me to introduce my colleagues," Kowalski said. "This is Dr. Katie Murphy, our cultural historian. She's the smartest person I know, and she's got a presentation that's going to blow your minds. Or whatever you've got instead of minds. No offense." The woman with the bag smiled and gave a small wave. She was younger than Kowalski, with red hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that seemed to be constantly taking notes on everything she saw. Vexari studied her for a moment. A historian? How quaint. What could human history possibly teach them? The species had only existed for a few 100,000 years. The Tellurians had buildings older than that. "We have prepared chambers for your delegation," Vexari said smoothly. "Tomorrow, we will begin formal negotiations regarding humanity's place in the galactic community. I trust you will find our terms reasonable." There was a subtle threat in that last word. Vexari had practiced it. Kowalski seemed entirely unaffected. "Looking forward to it," he said. "But fair warning. Doc Murphy's got some things she wants to show you first. Thinks there might be some cultural misunderstandings we should clear up." "Misunderstandings?" Vexari's crystalline form flickered with amusement. "I assure you, Ambassador, we have studied your species quite thoroughly." Dr. Murphy spoke for the first time. Her voice was pleasant, almost cheerful. "I'm sure you have. But with respect, Ambassador Vexari, I don't think you've studied the right parts." She patted her bag full of tablets and smiled. "See, you've been watching our hospitals and our churches and our funeral homes. You've seen how much we spend trying to stay alive. And you've concluded that we're afraid of dying." She paused, and something in her smile changed. "But you haven't seen what happens when a human says 4 very specific words." Vexari waited. "What words?" Dr. Murphy's smile grew wider. "Hold my beer." The translator struggled with the phrase for a moment, then gave up and rendered it literally. Vexari had no idea what it meant. He would learn. The negotiations began the following morning in a chamber that had been specifically designed to make visitors feel small. The ceiling soared up into darkness. The table was made from a single piece of polished stone that weighed more than the entire human spacecraft, and the chairs for the human delegation had been positioned so that they had to look up at the alien representatives. Ambassador Kowalski sat down in his chair, looked around at the arrangement, and laughed. This was not the reaction Vexari had expected. "Nice setup," Kowalski said, leaning back in his chair with the casual comfort of a man who had once negotiated with warlords in 3 different countries. "Very intimidating. Really sets a mood." Vexari decided to ignore the comment and proceed with the plan. He activated the holographic display at the center of the table, showing a star map of the local cluster. "We have prepared a proposal for humanity's integration into the galactic community," he began. "Given your species' relative youth and technological limitations, we believe a period of guided development would be appropriate." "Guided development," Kowalski repeated. "That's a fancy way of saying you want to tell us what to do." "We prefer to think of it as protection," Vexari said smoothly. "The galaxy can be a dangerous place, Ambassador. There are trade routes that pass through unstable regions. There are resources that require hazardous extraction. There are exploration missions into unknown space, where ships simply vanish and are never heard from again." He let that sink in for a moment. "We would not want humanity to encounter such dangers before you are ready." The message was clear. Accept our terms, or face the consequences. Every species understood this language. Every species responded to the fear of death and destruction. Kowalski turned to Dr. Murphy. "Doc, I think it's time for your presentation." Dr. Murphy stood up and walked to the center of the room. She moved with the easy confidence of someone who had given 1,000 lectures and was about to give the most important one of her life. She pulled a small device from her pocket and pressed a button, and suddenly the holographic display shifted to show an image from Earth. "Honored delegates," she said, her voice clear and calm. Before we discuss terms, I think we need to clear up some confusion about human psychology. The Vorthak delegate leaned forward, her armored plates grinding against each other. What confusion? You believe that humans are afraid of death, Dr. Murphy said. You've based your entire negotiation strategy on this assumption. And I'm here to tell you that you have fundamentally misunderstood our species. Vexari's crystalline form flickered with what might have been annoyance. We have studied your species for nearly 20 years. We have observed your medical systems, your religions, your cultural obsession with mortality. The evidence is clear. The evidence is incomplete, Dr. Murphy replied. She pressed another button, and the hologram changed to show a photograph. It was an old image, black and white, showing a group of men sitting on a steel beam high above a city. They were eating lunch. They were laughing. And there was nothing between them and the ground far below, except 800 feet of empty air. This photograph was taken in 1932, Dr. Murphy explained. These men were construction workers building one of the tallest structures in New York City. They did this every day. They ate their lunches on beams narrower than this table, with no safety equipment, no harnesses, nothing to catch them if they fell. She zoomed in on one of the men, a young worker with a wide smile. This man's name was Pete Sullivan. He worked on that building for 3 years. When a reporter asked him if he was ever afraid of falling, he said, and I quote, "Why would I be? I haven't fallen yet." The Nivari delegate's 16 eyes blinked in a rapid pattern that the translator identified as extreme confusion. That is not logical. No, Dr. Murphy agreed cheerfully. It isn't, and that's exactly my point. She changed the image again. This time, it showed a crowd of people running through a narrow street, while enormous animals with sharp horns chased them from behind. This is a festival that takes place in Spain every year. Those animals are called bulls. They weigh about 2,000 pounds, and they have been specifically bred to be aggressive. Every year, thousands of humans voluntarily run in front of them through narrow streets where there is no escape. Why? The Vorthak delegate demanded. Because it's fun, Dr. Murphy said simply. She let that statement hang in the air for a moment. You see, delegates, humans don't lack fear. We have plenty of fear. Our survival instincts are actually quite strong, but somewhere along the way, our species developed a very unusual response to dangerous situations. She pulled up another image, this time showing a primitive spacecraft that looked like it had been built from aluminum foil and determination. In 1969, 3 humans climbed into this machine. It had less computing power than a modern calculator. Its walls were thin enough that a strong punch could have broken through them. And they used it to fly to the moon. Dr. Murphy paused. The moon is about 240,000 miles from Earth. At the time, humanity had never traveled more than a few hundred miles from the planet's surface. The probability of failure was enormous. Hundreds of things could have gone wrong. A single malfunction would have meant certain death. Then why did they do it? Vexari asked. Despite himself, he was curious. Dr. Murphy smiled. Because another country told them they probably couldn't. The chamber was silent. You have to understand something about humans, she continued. When you tell us that something is impossible or dangerous, or that we shouldn't try it, something happens in our brains. It's like a switch gets flipped. Suddenly, that dangerous thing becomes the only thing we want to do. She looked directly at Vexari. We call it the hold my beer instinct. It's what happens right before a human does something spectacularly dangerous, usually for no good reason, often while their friends watch and cheer. Ambassador Kowalski nodded. I once saw a guy try to jump a motorcycle over a swimming pool full of alligators. Did he succeed? The Nivari delegate asked. Mostly, Kowalski said. Lost a couple toes, but he stuck the landing. Dr. Murphy changed the image again, showing a man standing next to a strange orange aircraft. This is Chuck Yeager. In 1947, just 2 years after a war that killed millions of people, he volunteered to fly an experimental aircraft designed to break the sound barrier. Scientists warned him that the aircraft might shake itself apart. They said the human body might not survive the stress. They told him there was a very good chance he would die. She paused. He did it anyway. And when he landed, his only complaint was that the flight hadn't been long enough. He showed up the next day asking when he could go faster. Vexari stared at the image of the smiling human pilot. "Your species is insane," he said quietly. "Oh, absolutely, Doctor," Murphy agreed. "But that insanity is why we're sitting at this table today. That insanity is why we went to the moon, split the atom, and built ships that could carry us to your doorstep." She smiled pleasantly. "So perhaps we should start these negotiations over, with a better understanding of who you're dealing with." Dr. Katie Murphy was enjoying herself. She had spent her entire career studying the strange and wonderful ways that humans had found to risk their lives throughout history. And now she had an audience that had never heard any of it before. The looks on the alien delegates' faces, or what passed for faces, were priceless. "Let me tell you about the sport of boxing," she said, pulling up a new image on the holographic display. It showed two humans in a ring, their fists raised, their faces already showing signs of damage. In this sport, two humans stand in a small enclosed space and take turns hitting each other in the head as hard as they can. The goal is to hit your opponent so hard that their brain temporarily stops working. We call this a knockout. The Navari delegate made a sound that the translator struggled to interpret. It eventually settled on horrified fascination. "This is a popular form of entertainment, Doctor," Murphy continued. "Millions of humans pay money to watch it. Children often dream of growing up to become professional brain damage receivers." "But why?" the Cathari representative asked, their gaseous form rippling with confusion. "Glory," Dr. Murphy said simply. "Honor. The thrill of competition. Also, significant amounts of money." She moved on to the next image, which showed a massive wave of water rising against a dark sky. Standing on a small board in front of the wave was a single human figure, impossibly tiny against the wall of water behind them. This is called surfing. Humans ride on thin boards across the surface of moving water. When the waves are small, it's considered a relaxing hobby. But some humans became bored with small waves, so they started seeking out the largest, most dangerous waves on the planet. She zoomed in on the wave. This particular wave is approximately 60 feet tall. The human riding it is named Eddie Dawson. If he falls, the weight of that water will push him down and hold him under until he drowns. If he hits the reef below, he will likely break his spine. The water is cold enough to cause hypothermia within minutes. "And he did this voluntarily?" Vexari asked. "He traveled 3,000 miles specifically to do this," Dr. Murphy confirmed. "He called it the best day of his life." "By Rosie." Ambassador Kowalski chuckled from his seat. "My nephew does that stuff. Kid's got more broken bones than sense." Dr. Murphy nodded and changed the display again. This time it showed a human figure floating in the blackness of space, connected to a spacecraft by a thin white cord. This is called a spacewalk. Humans leave the safety of their spacecraft and float in the vacuum of space, protected only by a thin suit. If the suit tears, they have about 15 seconds before they lose consciousness. If the cord breaks, they drift away and die alone in the endless void. She paused. "We consider this a routine part of space travel. Astronauts often compete for the opportunity to do spacewalks." The Vorthak delegate shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her species was brave by any standard, having evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill them. But even she found herself disturbed by what she was hearing. "Surely these are exceptional individuals," she said. "The bravest members of your species. They cannot be representative of all humans." Dr. Murphy smiled. This was the part she had been waiting for. "Let me show you something," she said, and the display changed to show an ordinary beach. The sky above it was dark and angry, filled with swirling clouds. In the distance, a massive storm was clearly approaching. And on the beach, dozens of humans were standing in the water, holding drinks and watching the storm come. This photograph was taken during a hurricane warning in Florida. A hurricane is one of the most powerful storms on our planet. It can destroy buildings, flood cities, and kill hundreds of people. The government had issued mandatory evacuation orders for this area. She let that sink in. These people refused to leave. When reporters asked them why, they said, and I quote, "The waves looked awesome." The chamber was silent. "Here is another example," Dr. Murphy said, changing the image to show a group of humans standing around a large metal container. One of them was holding a lit match. "This is called a gender reveal party. It's a celebration where parents announce whether their unborn child will be a boy or a girl. Somehow, over time, these celebrations evolved to include explosives." "Explosives?" the Navari delegate repeated, all 16 of her eyes widening. "Explosives, Dr. Murphy confirmed. Fireworks, smoke bombs, and in some cases, actual dynamite. Several of these parties have caused massive wildfires. People have been killed. And yet, the practice continues." She pulled up another image, this one showing a human strapped to what appeared to be a small rocket. "This is Johnny Martinez. He built this rocket in his garage. He had no formal engineering training. He wanted to prove that the Earth was flat. So he decided to launch himself into the sky to see for himself. He reached an altitude of approximately 1,800 feet before the rocket malfunctioned." "Did he die?" the Cathari asked. "Eventually, yes, on his third attempt. But not before he had inspired dozens of other humans to build their own homemade rockets." Ambassador Kowalski shook his head with what appeared to be fond exasperation. "I knew a guy who tried to make a jetpack out of leaf blowers. Broke both his legs, but he said he got about 3 feet off the ground." Dr. Murphy nodded and continued. "Let me tell you about a human tradition called New Year's Eve. Every year, at midnight, humans around the world celebrate by firing guns into the air in populated areas. The bullets come back down, of course. People are injured every year. And yet, the tradition continues." She showed them pictures of humans climbing frozen waterfalls with nothing but ice picks. She showed them videos of humans jumping off cliffs with small pieces of fabric strapped to their backs. She showed them footage of something called demolition derbies, where humans deliberately crashed cars into each other for entertainment. "There is a game," she said, "that children play at parties. It involves tying a string around a small cake and hanging it above a blindfolded child. The child is then given a stick and encouraged to swing wildly until they hit the cake and break it open. Other children stand nearby, waiting to grab the candy that spills out." She paused. "This is considered a fun activity for children." Vex Ari's crystalline form had stopped flickering. He stood perfectly still, processing what he had learned. "We have made an error," he said finally. "Yes," Dr. Murphy agreed. "You assumed that because we build hospitals and write stories about immortality, we must be afraid of death. But you missed the obvious conclusion." She smiled. "We build hospitals because we keep injuring ourselves. We write stories about immortality because we keep dying in interesting ways. We are not a species that fears death, Ambassador. We are a species that keeps accidentally finding death and then shaking its hand just to see what happens." She turned off the display. "Now, shall we discuss those dangerous trade routes again?" The Vorthak delegate requested a recess. This had never happened before in the history of galactic negotiations. The Vorthak were known throughout the galaxy as the most unshakable species in existence. They had evolved on a world where the ground itself tried to eat them. They did not get rattled. And yet, Ambassador Kraveth was currently sitting in a private chamber, her armored plates trembling slightly as she tried to process what she had just learned about humanity. "They jump out of aircraft," she said to no one in particular. "Functioning aircraft. For fun." In another chamber, the Navari delegate was having what her species called a clarity crisis. Her 16 eyes were unfocused, staring at nothing, as her multiple brains worked overtime to integrate this new information into her understanding of the universe. "They invented a game," she muttered, "where they throw sharp objects at a board while consuming poison. And they do this in social settings, while intoxicated." The Cathari representative had dispersed into a thin cloud of worried static, spread across most of their assigned quarters. They were trying to calculate the probability that any species with such behaviors could have survived long enough to develop space travel. The numbers did not make sense. Only Vexari remained in the main chamber, standing perfectly still, as his crystalline mind worked through the implications of Dr. Murphy's presentation. He had been so certain. The Tellurians had spent 19 years studying humanity. They had gathered millions of data points. They had built complex models of human psychology, and they had been completely, catastrophically wrong. The recess lasted 2 hours. When the delegates finally returned to the negotiation chamber, there was a different energy in the room. The subtle smugness was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like respect, mixed with a healthy dose of fear. "I have questions," the Vorthak delegate announced as she took her seat. Her voice was steady, but her armored plates were still trembling slightly. Dr. Murphy smiled pleasantly. "Of course. Your species performs surgery on its own hearts. I researched this during the recess. You cut open your chests and operate on your hearts, while those hearts are still beating." "Sometimes," Dr. Murphy agreed. "It's called open heart surgery. We've been doing it for decades. And sometimes," the Vorthak continued, her voice rising slightly, "you do this while the patient is awake." Ambassador Kowalski nodded. "My aunt had that done. Said it was weird watching them work on her own heart. But the doctors let her pick the music they played during the surgery. She chose old rock songs." The Vorthak stared at him for a long moment, then turned back to Dr. Murphy. "You also have a sport where humans ride on large animals that do not want to be ridden. The goal is to stay on the animal for 8 seconds while it tries to throw you off and trample you." "Bull riding," Dr. Murphy confirmed. "Very popular in certain parts of the world. Cowboys have been doing it for generations." "Cowboys," the Vorthak repeated, as if the word itself was somehow offensive. The Navari delegate leaned forward, her 16 eyes focusing on Dr. Murphy with uncomfortable intensity. "I found records of something called the Isle of Man race. Humans ride small, 2-wheeled vehicles at extreme speeds through narrow streets. The average speed is over 100 miles per hour. There are walls and buildings on either side. A small mistake means death." "The TT races, Dr. Murphy said, nodding. "One of the most dangerous racing events on Earth. Over 250 people have died competing in it since it started. We still hold it every year. People travel from all over the world to participate. Why do they not simply make it safer?" the Navari asked. Dr. Murphy tilted her head slightly. "Some people have suggested that. The racers weren't interested. They said it wouldn't be the same without the danger." The chamber fell silent again. Vexari finally spoke, his crystalline voice carefully controlled. "I have been reviewing your history more carefully. I found records of something called the Manhattan Project." "Ah," Dr. Murphy said. "Yes. Your species built a weapon capable of destroying entire cities, a weapon that used the fundamental forces of the universe itself. And to test this weapon, you gathered your brightest scientists in a remote location and detonated it, not knowing for certain whether it would ignite the atmosphere and destroy all life on your planet." "There was some debate about that," Dr. Murphy acknowledged. "The scientists calculated that the probability was very low. Most of them agreed it was worth the risk." "Most of them," Vexari repeated. "Some of them had concerns. But they did it anyway." The Kethari representative crackled with agitation. "You built a device that could have ended all life on your world. And you activated it because you thought it probably wouldn't?" "We needed to know if it worked, Dr. Murphy said reasonably. Ambassador Kowalski leaned back in his chair. "In fairness, it did work. Worked great, actually. Maybe too great. We built thousands more after that." "Thousands?" The Navari delegate's voice had risen to a pitch that the translator struggled to render. "We had a whole thing about it for a few decades," Kowalski explained. "Two big groups of humans pointing these weapons at each other. Each side ready to destroy the world rather than let the other side win. We called it the Cold War. Very tense time. Good music, though." Dr. Murphy pulled up another image on the display. It showed a group of humans standing at the edge of what appeared to be an active volcano. "This is a volcano tour," she explained. "Humans pay money to walk right up to the edge of openings in the earth that spew molten rock. Sometimes the ground gives way. Sometimes the gases are poisonous. People do this on their vacations. She changed the image to show a human swimming in dark water next to a massive shark. This is cage diving. Humans get in small metal cages and lower themselves into waters filled with predatory animals that could bite them in half. The cages don't always work perfectly. Another image. Humans climbing a sheer ice cliff. This is ice climbing. Humans use small metal tools to climb frozen waterfalls. The ice can break without warning. The falls are usually fatal. Another image. A human standing on a tiny platform at the top of a massive antenna tower. This is a tower climber. These humans climb structures over 1,000 feet tall to perform maintenance. Some of them do it without safety equipment because, and I quote, it slows them down. The Navari delegate made a sound that the translator rendered as a whimper. Vexari raised one crystalline appendage, requesting silence. The chamber quieted. I believe I understand now, he said slowly. Your species does not lack fear. You simply do not consider fear to be a sufficient reason not to do something. Dr. Murphy smiled. That's probably the best way to put it. Yes. The phrase you mentioned earlier. Hold my beer. This is what humans say before engaging in dangerous behavior? Usually, Dr. Murphy said. Sometimes they don't say anything. Sometimes they just do it. Vexari was quiet for a long moment. We may need to reconsider our negotiation strategy, he said finally. Ambassador Kowalski grinned. Take all the time you need. The negotiations continued for 3 more days. But they looked nothing like what the Galactic Council had originally planned. The carefully prepared documents that would have placed humanity under guided development were quietly set aside. The subtle threats and implications of danger were abandoned entirely. Instead, the 7 species of the Council found themselves in the unusual position of trying to figure out what to do with a species that seemed actively eager to do the things they had been warned were too dangerous. Let me make sure I understand, Vexari said on the morning of the final day. His crystalline form had lost much of its confident glow over the past few days, replaced by something that looked almost like bewildered acceptance. Your species wants the high-risk mining contracts in the asteroid belt. That's right, Ambassador Kowalski confirmed. These are operations where the failure rate is approximately 15%. Ships are destroyed. Crews do not survive. Sounds exciting, Kowalski said. We've got people who would line up for that kind of work. The Vorthak delegate leaned forward. In the days since Dr. Murphy's presentation, she had developed what seemed to be a genuine respect for humanity, though it was mixed with ongoing confusion. You also want the salvage operations in the debris fields, she said. These areas are filled with unstable wreckage. Explosions are common. Navigation is nearly impossible. We've got pilots who live for that kind of thing, Kowalski said. Back home, we call them adrenaline junkies. They'd probably pay you for the chance to fly through an exploding debris field. Dr. Murphy nodded from her seat nearby. There's actually a significant portion of our population that actively seeks out dangerous situations. They find normal life boring. They need the risk to feel alive. The Navari delegate's 16 eyes blinked in the pattern that Dr. Murphy had learned to recognize as deep thought. And the exploration missions into uncharted space? The regions where ships vanish and are never heard from again? Especially those, Kowalski said with a grin. You know how many humans have applied to be astronauts? Millions. Most of them know they'll probably never come back if something goes wrong. They apply anyway. Vexari processed this information slowly. 3 days ago, he had been certain that humanity would accept any terms the Council offered just to avoid danger. Now he was beginning to realize that humanity might be the most valuable asset the galaxy had ever encountered. Precisely because they were drawn to the things that terrified every other species. There is a region, he said carefully, beyond the outer territories. We call it the empty zone. No species has successfully explored it. Those who have tried have not returned. We have classified it as permanently off-limits. Kowalski's eyes lit up. Tell me more. It is approximately 200 light-years across. Our probes have detected unusual energy signatures, gravitational anomalies, and what might be the remains of ancient structures. We believe it may hold technology or resources of immense value. but no crew has survived long enough to confirm this. And you want us to explore it, Kowalski said. It wasn't a question. Vexari hesitated. The original plan had been to use the empty zone as a threat, to remind humanity of the dangers that lurked beyond the safety of Council space. But now he saw an opportunity. If humanity were to successfully explore the empty zone, he said slowly, it would change your standing in the galactic community entirely. You would no longer be a junior species under guidance. You would be equals. Perhaps more. Kowalski looked at Dr. Murphy. She was smiling. Ambassador, she said, I think you've finally figured out the right approach to human psychology. The final documents were signed that afternoon. Humanity received access to all the contracts that other species had deemed too dangerous. They were given the rights to explore regions that had been abandoned. They were offered partnerships in ventures that had been considered impossible. In exchange, they agreed to share whatever they discovered. It seemed like a fair trade to everyone involved. As the human delegation prepared to leave, the Nivari delegate approached Dr. Murphy with a question that had been bothering her for days. I have studied your presentation extensively, she said. I have reviewed the historical records. I have analyzed the psychological profiles. And I still do not understand one thing. What's that? Dr. Murphy asked. Why? Why do humans seek out danger when it provides no evolutionary advantage? Why risk death for no logical reason? What drives this behavior? Dr. Murphy thought about the question for a moment. It was something she had spent her entire career trying to understand. I think, she said finally, it comes down to something very simple. Humans hate being told what they can't do. We hate limits. We hate boundaries. When someone tells us something is impossible, we take it as a personal challenge. She pulled out her tablet and showed the Nivari one final image. It was a photograph from 1974, grainy and faded with age. It showed a man walking on a thin wire stretched between two massive towers, hundreds of feet above a city, with no safety net below. This man's name was Phil Petit, Dr. Murphy said. He spent months planning this walk. He could have died at any moment. When police finally caught him on the other side, they asked him why he did it. She paused. He said, when I see 3 oranges, I have to juggle. When I see 2 towers, I have to walk. He couldn't explain it any better than that. He saw something that seemed impossible, and something inside him needed to prove that it wasn't. The Nivari stared at the image for a long moment. Your species is remarkable, she said finally. Terrifying. But remarkable. Thank you, Dr. Murphy said. We try. The human delegation boarded their ship an hour later. Ambassador Kowalski paused at the airlock and turned back to wave at the assembled council members who had come to see them off. Thanks for the warm welcome, he called out. We'll be back soon. Probably with some stories about the empty zone. If you survive, Vexari said. It was meant as a genuine expression of concern. Kowalski just laughed. Ambassador. In my experience, the best stories always come from the situations you barely survive. That's what makes them worth telling. The airlock closed, and the human ship lifted off from the docking bay. It was still a blocky, utilitarian thing, clearly designed by engineers who cared more about function than form. But as the council members watched it disappear into the darkness of space, heading toward regions that no sane species would ever approach, they found themselves feeling something unexpected. Hope. Because if there was one thing they had learned about humanity, it was this. When humans said they were going to do something impossible, they usually found a way to do it. The official records of the Galactic Council were updated the following week. The section on humanity's psychological profile was completely rewritten. The part about fear of death was removed entirely. In its place was a simple warning that would be shared with every species in the galaxy. Never challenge a human to prove they are unafraid. They will accept, they will succeed, and they will somehow manage to make it look fun. Underneath, someone had added a handwritten note in human script. Hold my beer and watch this. The Galactic Council never did figure out what beer was. But they learned to fear those 4 words more than any weapon humanity could have built.